James, welcome to the podcast.
Eric, thank you so much for having me on.
I'm excited because we've just had a couple of lovely days judging here
That we have.
The ADI International Spirits Competition. One more afternoon to go.
Sure.
Just the good stuff. Could you introduce yourself to our listeners and just give us a sense of who you are and what brings you to this judging?
All right, sure. So I'm James from Old Youngs, so surname Young. I'm the older brother, hence the name. It's a little distillery in Western Australia, so I'm a long way from home right now. In Perth, Western Australia, we have a distillery in a wine region called the Swan Valley, and we turned 10 this year.
Oh,
so
congrats.
Thank you very much. So May 13th, we turned 10.
My birthday.
Are you kidding me? Well, you have to come and celebrate with us.
All right.
We've been distilling gin mostly, and a little bit of vodka, and more recently just starting to put down a little bit of brandy. So.
We might get to that later.
We might.
I have a feeling. Very good. Well, so the impetus for this conversation is I sort of realized in a sort of obvious way that there's a bottleneck that occurs because not too many Americans get to Australia because of the cost and the travel time, and vice versa.
And the snakes, the spiders.
Yes. Yeah, you don't exactly market yourself on all the right channels.
TikTok has a lot to answer for.
So there's consequently a knowledge gap between what Americans think is going on in Australia, specifically when it comes to spirits and cocktails, and what's actually going on.
Sure.
So I was hoping you might just walk us through some of the basics. What generally do you find people have like misconceptions about when you visit the U.S., which you've done several times?
I have.
What misconceptions do you find that Americans have?
Yeah, well, look, I mean, the spirits industry in Australia is very new. Well, old and new. So the current iteration of the Australian spirits industry is very new. So it's only 30 years ago that the rules got changed to allow distillers to distill with small stills.
Okay.
So that meant that realistically there was only one major distillery in Australia making a fairly rough rum that you may have come across called Bundaberg. But a guy called Bill Lark, who's considered the godfather of the Australian craft spirits industry, got the rules changed back in 1993. But as recent as 10 years ago when I started, there was only 30 distilleries in Australia. Now there's 900. So in 10 years, we've had this incredible boom.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's mirrored, I guess, some things in the States with a huge, big growth, and that growth is now being managed and sorting itself out. But it's Australia's a country. It's a very big country for a start. And it's a country blessed with a lot of natural resources in terms of its food production and its base materials. So a truckload of wheat, a truckload of barley, obviously a well-known and an established wine industry. So we have fantastic raw materials, similar to the States, but that's meant that there's whiskey being made, there's gin being made, there's rum being made, there's starting to be some agave now being made in Australia. There's actually a long brandy history, which I know I've talked. So yeah, there is a pretty diverse industry, but as I said, a very young industry. So you have seen one or two Australian brands break out of Australia, but it is still very much in its nascent phase.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say the old and new because it really does mirror sort of the American trajectory with prohibition.
Yes.
And then everything having to sort of start again from the ground up. And, there's the mid to late 20th century, it was really only the massive, whiskey producers until the 80s when I believe Jorg Rupp out here in Alameda started his small distillery, which started the whole craft kickoff. So it seems like a very similar timeline trajectory, very similar diversity of resources. But I would wager that if you walked up to any American on the street, just a casual spirits and cocktail enthusiast, and you said, what kind of spirits do they make in Australia, they wouldn't have a clue.
No, probably not.
So what has made it, or begun to make its way across the Pacific in terms of the spirits that you might find if you were to look hard enough as an American
Yeah,
consumer?
sure. So, as I said, the guy, Bill Lark, and Lark Distillery was sort of one of the first, or was the first, craft distillery in Australia. And Bill's in Tasmania, so the tiny little island down the bottom of Australia. And the Tasmanian whiskey industry is actually probably the most developed. So Lark Distillery and then Sullivan's Cove. Sullivan's Cove won some massive awards, probably about 10, maybe a little bit longer ago. Won like World Whiskey of the Year, and that really sort of got the attention of whiskey experts, whiskey nerds, if you like. And so that's probably the first time that Australia was noticed on a world stage. So people like Lark, Hellier's Road, Sullivan's Cove were sort of the first people to really break out of Australia, but that was on a very, very small volumes. The next one probably in the line of that story is David Vitale at Starwood. And David spent some time actually at Lark, and then decided that rather than doing really high-end single barrel release, sort of for us $200 or $300 a bottle kind of level, that he wanted to make whiskey a lot more accessible. So Starwood was born, which is in Melbourne, down at the Port of Melbourne, and with this idea of aging in Australian wine casks. So again, there's this connection back to Australian wine. And so Starwood have now been in the States for a while. Starwood was actually, Diageo took a share in Starwood a little while back. It's actually that ownership has actually just returned back to David. So now David's the sole owner again of Starwood, which is, I'm sure for him, both daunting and exciting.
Well, it's nice to get Diageo to spread it around and then take the
yeah.
back.
So David actually spent 4 or 5 years out here spreading the word of Australian whiskey, and so Starwood would be the first one to look for. The other one is probably Four Pillars. So Four Pillars, founded by 4 guys, but the 2 that are probably best known are a guy by the name of Cam Mackenzie, who did a lot of the distilling, and Stu Gregor. And Stu's the madman, the entrepreneur, the showman of the group.
Sure. You need one.
Yes, absolutely. The raconteur was the word I was looking for. And Stu did a phenomenal job of spruiking for the Australian spirits industry, both within Australia and outside. So Four Pillars is probably the most widely spread of Australian gins. So if you're going to have a hierarchy, I think probably Australian whiskey, then probably Australian gin. That there is a lot of rum made up in the northeast of Australia. In Queensland, it's endemic to that region. No one drinks rum like a Queenslander. And so you see a big concentration of rum distilleries up there. So you are maybe starting to see a little bit of Australian rum maybe get out, but I'd say gin and whiskey and probably Starwood and Four Pillars would be the first brands you could look for. I know that Manly Spirits have done a little bit of export. I think that you are starting to see some other brands like Archie Rose, I know, are starting to consider doing some export. They're a big brand in New South Wales. We do a little bit of export mostly in Asia. So yeah, it's you are just starting to see people spread their wings a little.
So let's talk a little bit more in detail about specifically the whiskey and the gin, because I think those are going to be the 2 categories that my listeners are really piqued in terms of curiosity.
Yeah.
With the whiskey, is it fair to assume that Tasmania has a climate that would be more approaching that of Scotland?
Yes, definitely. Yeah. So Tasmania, maritime climate. I mean, and you do have highlands and lowlands as well, but yeah, probably more similar. But Australia has a greater diversity in temperature. I think that might be similar to here, and so you see maturation happening quicker than you would, and certainly cask characters coming on quicker than you would see in Scotland. And Melbourne in particular would classify it as 4 seasons in one day. It's a place where you always need a jumper and a sun visor and and an umbrella. It's you're never quite sure what you're going to get in Melbourne, but that's great in terms of temperature variation. So it means you get some pretty quick maturation or developed maturation.
Right.
And so, yeah, Tasmania, sort of the home and the birthplace probably of Australian craft whisky, but now you are seeing a lot made in Victoria. There's some great whisky distillers in WA, so be remiss of me not to mention Cam Syme from Lime Burners, which is down in Albany, which is the south coast of Western Australia, who was pretty early to the party as well. And then, yeah, Archie Rose, who are now starting to put down a lot of whisky in New South Wales. So it has spread to the mainland, but sort of birthed in Tasmania.
So the story of Japanese whiskey is pretty well known in that you have a country that doesn't have an existing whiskey tradition. We're going to ignore shochu.
Yep.
But they don't have an existing Western-style whiskey tradition. One man goes to Scotland, studies under the Scottish whiskey distillers, and comes back. And for that reason, all of the great whiskeys in Japan are sort of, or at least have traditionally been modeled after the Scottish style of whiskey making. In America, we're just getting our, so we just defined our single malt, or
yes.
we just decided we didn't want to define our single malt, but wanted to have a designation anyway. Yes. But we had this whole very long rye and bourbon tradition, very different than Japan. Where does Australia fall into this, specifically with the grain input choices that are being made by especially these early and premium producers?
Yeah, so the majority of whiskey made in Australia is single malt style. So there are now starting to be some people making more in an American style, and you're seeing some more bourbon style whiskey, but the vast majority is in has that Scottish tradition. And Bill would tell this much better than I, but I know that he had some Scottish influences and spent some time in Scotland before he got up and running. So, yeah, but very much in that single malt style. So, and obviously Australia has a lot of barley, but you're also starting to see wheated whiskies. So Starwood do a product called Twofold, which is a wheated whiskey. So it's leaning on what we have available, which is a lot less corn and a lot more wheat and barley in Australia. So that would be where we start. The other thing that, as I alluded to earlier, you are starting to see this emergence of, given the fact that we are a country renowned for its wine, and as you say, the US is a very long way away. Shipping barrels from the US down to Australia is not particularly economically viable, and when you have incredible wines on your doorstep and incredible casks, you're seeing a lot of Australian wine go into sherry and wine casks, so red wine cask in particular.
Right.
So, which, as we've seen in the judging in the last couple of days, can be a challenging cask to work with, but I think that it's something that Australia's really starting to nail. So yeah, it's that would be my start point for a definition for where you're seeing Australian whiskey going.
That's interesting. I have a couple of cask follow-ups. We'll start with, is there any significant like new char going on? Like, is it going? If I were to taste some of these whiskeys, would they be aged in any sort of charred oak, first fill or not, and then go into the wine cask, or are they doing the majority of their maturation within the wine?
So it's mostly going into second fill. So so it's not being recharred. It's going into wine cask. So you're not getting those really big, huge, toasty vanilla notes. You're seeing more of again, probably that secondary level. I mean, I know that Scotland's using a lot of American second fill American bourbon, but yeah, so it's less new cask and more second fill, third fill.
Is anyone playing around with some of the Asian whiskey casks, like a Cavallon or a Japanese?
Not so much. No, not so much. No, it is. We just have a blessing of an enormous amount of casks in Australia. Look,
Right.
there's some people going into new oak, but that would be, I'd suggest that's more French cask than French oak rather than American oak.
Okay.
But yeah, most of it would be second fill.
Interesting. Very interesting. Okay, and then the other cask question that I have is sort of plays on this what grows together goes together type mentality with the wine casks. Obviously, it makes complete sense, but here in the U.S., you just made the observation, maybe not so much good wine cask finished whiskey crossing tables and shelves and being poured at the bar here, based on at least what I've tasted. If there ever was a place to crack the code of wine barrel maturation, it would seem to be Australia. Do you have any thoughts on that, and what makes a good wine barrel finish versus what makes a less successful one?
Look, that's starting to go above my pay grade. Like I am a gin distiller, not a whiskey distiller, and you probably need Dave Vitale in this chair to tell that story. But I agree with you that, look, it is something that we have abundance of. And it's treated as a first choice, not as necessarily a finish. Mm-hmm. So I think that there's been a lot of work done to make sure that works. And look, I can only really go on the result. But if you talk to the guys at say Archie Rose or at Starwood, then they'd have a much more comprehensive answer for you. But I can just tell you that the product that I've tasted is delicious.
Yeah, and we don't need to go any further down this road, but I think there is further down this road to go, because it seems to me that like two of the factors that I would want to have a more in-depth conversation with these whiskey makers about would be the control of the conditions, right? Because there's two approaches here in the U.S. or anywhere. It's like you either let the weather do its thing and then you adjust accordingly with your blending, or you tightly control your maturation conditions.
Yep.
And so with it seemed with the diversity of weather types, you've got the more Scottish conditions down in Tasmania, and like as you mentioned in Melbourne, the pretty aggressive diurnal shifts occasionally being more like Kentucky.
Yep.
So yeah, it seems like there's just so much to talk about, and feel free to send your friends my way.
I am going to tee that up for you, I promise. David will be on the show for sure.
Great. Let's turn to gin, which I love. It's one of my favorite spirits to judge and one of my favorite spirits to enjoy. When I think of Australian gin, of course I think of Four Pillars. A couple of noteworthy expressions to me are the olive leaf and the bloody Shiraz.
Yep.
Can you maybe just talk about those two?
Sure. So look, Four Pillars started not that long before us, so only about a year or two before us, and started off with their rare dry. Bloody Shiraz was an experiment that happened at Christmas. It must have been just after Christmas, because vintage is in sort of January, February. Cam Mackenzie, apart from man of many talents, so the distiller and the production brains for Four Pillars, but also had a wine background, but was also an Olympic sprinter. So he's had an interesting career. And he was the one who had this idea of Four Pillars also in a wine region, and so taking the pressings and I think some whole Shiraz grapes as well, and coming up with something and looking to do something, and in doing that, in creating Bloody Shiraz, and I think that the numbers are online, but I think they might have started with 600 bottles in the very first batch, and that might have been 2,000 the year after. But by a couple of years after that, it was in the tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands. So the growth was incredible. But by doing that, they invented a category, and I love that. I really, personally, when we're trying to create things, we don't try to necessarily look at what someone else has done. Just because someone else has done a pink gin doesn't mean I'm going to do one. But they did something truly unique, and as I said, created a category. You go to a gin show in Australia, and or if you go to any kind of spirit show, then nowadays there'll be the 50 stands, and half of them have got a wine gin these days. So, and you'll be look, mine's unique because it's a GSM gin. Well, is it that unique? Is it? Whereas Stu and Cam created something brand new, and it is a category. It's in the Australian Awards.
It is
the wine gin. So, and they are delicious. They do make some really fantastic cocktails.
Yes.
And it's a really intriguing product. And it made a name for Four Pillars.
Really, yeah, it really did. And I it's a category in Australia, but really not much of a category here in the U.S. I think I've seen a couple of gin distillers play around with it, but it hasn't really taken off. And this is sort of a PSA out there. Anybody in like the Finger Lakes wine region with all that beautiful Riesling, I would love to do a Riesling gin. And some nice golden colored, a little sweetened. I think that would be lovely. So hit the digits and we'll make that happen if anyone has some Riesling they'd like to dump into a gin. But so the olive leaf gin is interesting. And I'd love to talk about some of the gins that you're making. So maybe what we can do is we can transition to talking about one of the other things I love about Australia is the unique botanicals that don't make their way over here.
Yeah.
So I don't know if the olive leaf gin, it's one of my favorites from them. So I don't know if that's a useful way to segue into the Australian botanicals and some of the stuff that you're doing.
Well, look, I mean, the line that I use whenever I'm doing a tasting is that Australia is an island, and we have unique flora and fauna, and flora is good in gin and fauna is bad.
But not the ants.
True. But we do. We have an incredible range of botanicals, native botanicals that are available to us, and that can be some native citrus, so things like finger lime and desert lime and sunrise lime, which are all amazing. We have a number of myrtles, so anise myrtle, lemon myrtle. There's actually juniper myrtle in the southwest of Western Australia, which we use in one of our gins. And then some of the native herbs, so bush tomato, bush mint. There's a river mint, which is slightly different. So we have, and then some native fruits, so things like quandongs and forest cherry, and so there's a bunch of different things that there's actually a desert lychee as well. So there's amazing range of flavours there, and I think to start with, the Australian gin industry did two things. The first thing was like they got very excited to use these things, and so there was definitely some gins where it was just throw in everything we can get, and you have to like it because it's Australian, which happens. But I think as we've seen our industry grow, and that's been refined, and there was definitely lemon myrtle is probably the most iconic Australian botanical, and it is a very strong and very it's a fun botanical to play with because it is so. It has a beautiful flavour and a beautiful aroma. It's just, I think, to start with, everyone went overboard with it. And I think Australian gin for a little while just became lemon myrtle. I think literally there was a rule. I think we all had to sign a contract that said, thou shalt use lemon myrtle in their gin. Right? But I think that's been brought back a bit. But that's one. But yeah, we do a gin called Six Seasons. So around Australia, the Indigenous people, the Aboriginals, had all sorts of different seasons from 2 to 11.
Yeah.
And then Europeans turned up and said, by the way, you've got 4 seasons. And it was like, well, we've been here 20,000 years, but sure, it's 4. In Perth, it was 6. Very quickly, the 6 seasons, Makuru, Benuru, but your listeners and viewers won't remember that. But as one of the elders explained to me, she said, you'll remember this. The 6 seasons in Perth are nice, cold, wet, hot, very hot, and extremely hot. And when you lay that on the Perth calendar, it's perfect. So we do a gin called Six Seasons, so one botanical per season, and so we use desert lime, which are these tiny little, they're smaller than grapes, they look like maybe raisin size, but these little just fluorescent green vitamin C bombs. They're amazing. Like I ate them whole out of the freezer. Like they're just amazing. So we have that. We have gelatin wax, which is a wax flower, which gives a lovely citrus note as well. Tiny bit of lemon myrtle. And then the bush mint, which Procyanthera incisor, cut leaf mint, which has a real pepperminty note, slight marijuana note. And then we have the juniper myrtle and sea parsley.
Okay.
So you can create some amazing flavours out of these botanicals, and I think sometimes confuse international judges because these are smells of flavours that they've never come across before.
Yes.
So I can say to you that it smells like the Australian bush after it rains, but that's not particularly useful to you unless you've been in the Australian bush after it rains, in the same way that I don't know what a birch forest might smell like. So yeah, it's interesting when it comes to international judging, but it does give us an incredible palette to create just truly unique gins.
Well, and I think that's one of the appeals of gin is that it can be something that is very stable and evokes memories based on who you were with and what you were doing when you were drinking it. So like your London Dries, like if you have a favorite London Dry and you have memories of martinis or gin and tonics with that particular cocktail, it's not going to be tied necessarily to a sense of place, but more a sense of emotion, a sense of culture and togetherness. But I do think that gin also possesses this massive potential for this, travel in a glass, of just being able to transport yourself to a place and potentially a season purely based on the botanicals that are being expressed. And I love that trend in gin because I think it's very timeless. Just as a well-made London Dry style gin or even a Dutch style gin can be timeless in its own way, I think that sense of place and sense of travel can be really nice. And I think that, to me, that's the appeal, because I've never been to Australia.
Yeah.
And so I'd like to at least be able to travel there in some way, shape, or form.
Throw a bottle.
So what other botanicals, or what other products do you make, and what other botanicals might American consumers be on the lookout for? Like finger limes is, I think, probably one of the more popular ones because some of those actually make their way here.
Yep.
And I gotta say, I prefer those to a Buddha's hand.
Yep.
Buddha's hand to me smells like when it goes through a still, it smells like cleaner.
Yeah. It has that sort of real industrial lemon kind of. Yeah, I know what you're talking about. Yeah. Look, the native citrus is a big one. So finger limes is one. Another one which is really interesting is wattle seed.
Oh, I have seen that.
Yeah. So wattle seed is one that ideally is roasted, is where it gets its most flavour. And it's really interesting. I did a gin for That Boutique Gin Co. A while back, and lucky enough to do the first Australian-made gin for them. And we used wattle seed, and wattle seed has this character where it could be popcorn, it could be caramel, it has like a nutty note to it, and it gets explained in a bunch of different ways. But what it is it smells and tastes like wattle seed. But until you smell and know what wattle seed is, it gives this quite intriguing character to a spirit. So we've seen it actually. Someone did a native grain gin where they took, there could potentially have been a little bit of marketing associated with it, but it did use native grains in it. I'm not sure how much, but and we've seen wattle seed used as a flavouring in both gins. Liqueurs. There's an amazing liqueur. I should give a shout out to the guys at Brookie's who make a macadamia liqueur called Mac, which has wattle seed in it as well. And yeah, that spirit is just divine.
Yeah.
Like if you do go to Australia, that's one I would seek out. It's a great place to visit too. Like when you visit the distillery, like there's koalas in the trees and stuff. It's beautiful.
I prefer the koalas up in the trees where they belong.
Oh yeah, no, they're up there. Not in the gin. Not in the gin.
Good,
just
good.
in the trees.
Well, that's good. And you know, I think you bring up an interesting. I don't even want to call it a problem. An interesting opportunity of cultural translation. And I think that if there was one thing I would love to see more of was opportunities for American consumers and especially American bartenders, because we're talking about gin here and gin gets mixed. And so I would love to see opportunities for American bartenders to interact with some of these botanicals in a way, in a food setting, in a way that they can consume them and taste them on their own, understand them for their own unique merits, and then be able to understand them in a gin. Because I think you're right. It does have the potential to baffle both American judges and American bartenders who just don't have a concept. Like you said, you don't have birch beer in Australia, so you wouldn't understand someone waxing nostalgic about that flavor.
Yeah.
And so I think it cuts both ways. So it's a really interesting dilemma, but it does make me also think about the impact that Australia has had on the cocktail end of things. Obviously, some big things are going on. Mr. Black is a big sort of booming brand at the moment. Do you have any thoughts or perspectives on the mixology scene that our listeners might be interested in?
Look,